Looks like something just got shipped to me directly from Snake Mountain. Here's a look at the brand new Mondo Master Universe Skeletor Deluxe Figure Mondo exclusive. Some days you just don't like to feel good. Some days you like to feel evil. Our Skeletor 1/6 scale is our definitive version, featuring some of our favorite accessories from the original Master Universe mini comics and 80s Mattel releases. Everything about this figure is completely brand new, with improved functionality from the top to bottom, including new and improved waist articulation for much better range of motion. Skeletor's standard armor, I'll call a portrait, and Terror Claw's reference to the original mini comics, while his classic portrait, battle armor, and dragon blaster armor are callbacks to the 80s Mattel line. A whole lot of stuff comes with a brand new Skeletor, but before, of course, we look at the things that come included with the figure, let's first grab the tape measure and see how tall he stands. I'd also like to send out a big thank you to the folks over at Mondo that did provide this sample of the exclusive edition of Skeletor that we could have a look at in this review. The figure was originally over on their site for $260. It has since sadly sold out. But if you want to get the standard edition of this guy, it's currently still on a pre-order with a release date of January 2024. The brand new Skeletor, though, stands almost 12 inches. He's actually more or less like 11 3/4 of an inch in height, or the figure's about 29 centimeters tall. Standing on either side of Skeletor, here's first what the figure looks like along with He-Man. Now, this was the version 2 He-Man that had the much more improved body and build, and of course, brand new head sculpt. It came included with a whole bunch of different armors also as well. We also had a look at another Skeletor here on this channel. Here's what the figure looks like with the Revelations Skeletor, who was for a long time really my stand-in Skeletor, who might very well now be replaced with the new one we got from Mondo here. First thing we'll have a look at is the display stand that comes included with Skeletor. One thing you may notice if you have been picking up the Mondo releases in the past is that we used to get display stands that look like this. The idea was that they were supposed to look like an M on the back, but unfortunately what it meant, though, is it sacrificed space needed for Skeletor, or really any of that matter, 6-scale figure's feet. What they've done instead is they've given us now an oval-shaped display stand. It doesn't have really anything in the way of paint, but it gets a nice little texturing cobblestone on the top of it. It's molded nice here in black plastic. It doesn't really, again, necessarily need to have any paint on it. It gets the job done. From the display stand, though, one thing I did want to point out, though, is on mine, and I'm sure across the board for everyone else's as well, they have bent a frame here on one side of the clip. You'll notice that this side goes straight up. This side, on the other hand, bends out on the side. I'm not really sure why it had to be like this. Maybe they've done it to accommodate... The only guess I really had, and I'm sure I'm completely wrong, is by bending it out the way they did, maybe it reduces the tension, because every once in a while, this would start to split. On some of my earlier 6-scale figures, it would start to split the actual plastic post by just having too much tension. Maybe bending it out like this maybe relieves a little bit of that tension. I'm sure I have no idea. But still, though, it's a nice little display stand. It gets the job done. It's exactly what I really would have needed from 6-scale figures from the beginning. Just a much larger footprint to accommodate the figure that's going to be standing on top of it. So with Skeletor, there were 2 versions of this guy currently over on Mondo's site. The timed edition exclusive version that we will be looking at in this review is currently again sold out. The exclusive would have added the additional cloth cape and the cloth hood, while all then the timed edition releases would have had then all the additional armor. You may see some of it sitting around right now. We'll look through first the timed edition exclusive pieces, then we'll jump over to all the things that come included with the standard release if you wanted to get on board getting that one. First, the figure comes with 2 variations of armor. The first armor that the figure comes included with is the Dragon Blaster Skeletor. Now, this one has a flip out, or 2 panels that basically separate via magnets. You may be able to see that not only is there magnets on the top by the shoulders, but there's also little clips. The clips, though, attach as very securely as you would expect with tiny little magnets. Unfortunately, though, by adding the additional dragon on the back of the Dragon Blaster armor, it's going to add a lot of additional weight to this. But for what it is, it's a nicely detailed armor, mixing some purples and some additional reds added in there as well. Some nice little bolts of larger gunmetal gray are also given there as well. And there's the open section, of course, that's going to feed the chain through, and that's going to shackle onto the side of Skeletor's arm. Of course, this whole talk of talking dragon blaster, you need yourself a dragon, and you get this really interesting looking dragon that comes included with this release as well. The dragon, I was very surprised to see how much posability this guy actually possessed. Not only having swivels in his necks, the neck hinged up and down, you can also move the head also independently back and forth. The mouth did also open and close. The mouth we will talk more about in a moment. There's also some swiveling in the arms. You can bring those arms outward. You can swivel as well the individual hands. Those move also back and forth. You can swivel the whole back section of it, move the tails back or move the legs back and forth. There's also as well movement there on the backs of the feet, and you can also swivel the tail back and forth as well. It's a very, again, detailed looking dragon, but because it's using so much plastic and some additional articulation points, it does mean it adds some additional weight to it. Idea though is it's supposed to, there's a little clip on the front of its collar, and it basically latches on. It's a little harder at times because you want to make sure that the body is completely flush, but it just locks itself into. Now that's one thing that always will end up happening. Maybe it's just best to look at the back section first. This basically just hooks in place. Get those arms out of the way. There we go. And then that just basically sits on the back of Skeletor's body. Going back, and remember talking about those little tiny magnets? The problem with the tiny little magnets though is when you have the two pieces together like this on Skeletor's body, the sheer weight of the dragon alone sometimes ends up detaching the back of the armor. So it is one thing that while moving the figure around, especially with this design of the Dragon Blaster, yeah, the weight of the dragon will add unnecessary weight to the back of the shell piece, and this sometimes usually will detach. And of course, we'll put this onto Skeletor's body in a second. The figure also, I guess while we're still on the topic of the dragon also comes included with a blast effect. The blast effect is nicely cast here in clear, translucent green plastic. It just sort of does have a little bit of a glow look to it. There's a little clip on the inside right there. You can see that? We're going to open up the mouth of the dragon, and then located on the inside, the roof of his mouth, there's a little opening slot. You're going to take the dragon blast piece, and that just basically fits inside the mouth, and then you can close quarters around that. And it gives us a really neat effect. Really fun, although again, it's going to add a whole lot of unnecessary weight onto the back of Skeletor's body. And don't worry, I'll show you guys in a second how this all clips in place. I guess while we're also still talking about the dragon, we don't want to leave that just yet. The figure as well comes included with a shackle piece. Now the shackle piece is something that's going to wrap around through Skeletor. If we go back to the armor, for example, it's going to chain its way through the front opening section here of his armor, and then it's going to shackle on this side of Skeletor's body. The one thing I will say, though, as a critique, is if you look at the chain, this is the shackle piece, of course, that's going to go around Skeletor's wrist. It's a real metal chain, which I like. What I don't like, though, is that on the end of it, they didn't give you really a means to attach this properly onto the collar piece of the dragon. The only thing you really have to do is the same thing you usually have to do when it comes to little key rings, is that one of the looplets, the one on the end, you have to pry a little bit away from itself. I don't want to do this too often, though, because if you've ever had to deal with tiny little chain pieces like this, when you start to move a link back and forth too frequently, eventually it will break the link completely off, and you don't want that. So you just want to pry it just enough here that you can then fit it around. So we're just going to move the dragon out of the way here. I really wish that they could have done something differently, like, I don't know, like if they had maybe made this as something that could open up, so we weren't having to rely solely on having to bend a link in order to get it around the frame. I mean, unfortunately, though, like you really have to bend it by quite a lot in order to fit that around the collar piece. I mean, you can see how thick that ringlet is and how thin the tiny little link is to fit that around the dragon. Surely there must have been some easier way to have this be something that would open up, and then this would then fit around this. Again, it does fit, but you really have to bend it by quite a lot in order to get that around it. It needed to do something a little bit different, I think. The same thing also means as well when you get to the padlock. While nicely detailed the padlock is, it has some additional silver added in there and brushed on some lighter green. Unfortunately, again, it doesn't have any way of, you have to kind of, again, loop this through. I mean, I guess this is the easiest of the thing. You don't really have to, you have to kind of feed this through. Feeds it through just like that. That, of course, is going to fit onto the side. I guess the padlock isn't really so much the issue. The biggest issue is more so right here. And then, again, like there's really no way to attach that properly. I'm going to get back to that more in a moment. The figure also comes included variations then of his battle armor, his battle chest armor, which I really like. I was a big fan of the fact that they included this with He-Man. I'm glad to see that Skeletor also followed suit, no pun intended, and it basically works the exact same way. Some nice details on the back. You've got little skeleton faces, a big large one down below here, and it works the exact same way. You're just attaching the two halves, the magnets on either side of it. And then again, like this one doesn't actually have little hooks or little clipping pieces, which was kind of strange because if you look at it, if you put the two halves together, for example, there seems to be no clip on either side. I would have expected like tiny little pegs on this side and then following up to little tiny holes on this side where the two halves would clip together. Instead, what it seems to be is relying just on the magnet pieces on the tops of the shoulders and the bottom half of the body, and those again snap into place. Like with He-Man, though, you get two variations of his battle armor. You get one that has the undamaged version of the bats. It was like the back motif that they used for the front of the armor. And then there's also one that's a battle damage version, which basically is just one that has a big crack running through it. And that attaches the exact same way via magnets. The magnets, you can see, have a fair bit of adhesive that they put over top of it, but they still stay in place. And again, I'd rather them use magnets really when it comes to this than really relying on pegs. Pegs are always one thing that, especially if you're pulling these things off frequently and putting them back in place, pegs, if you're not too careful, could potentially break off. Magnets is just so much easier. And again, that's battle armor Skeletor. We'll clip those pieces off in a second. Again, I'll show you how the armor swaps out in place in a second as well. And then the last thing that the figure comes included with as well for the timed edition, not including, of course, the heads that we'll get more into in a moment, the figure as well comes included with the Terror Claws. The Terror Claws, they say, are based from the mini comics, but also as well, we did get ourselves a Terror Claws release in the original Master Universe figure line back in the 80s. We did also get a follow-up for that of the Master Universe Origins line, and you get some really nice looking Terror Claws. Now, the earlier Skeletor would have only just simply had shell pieces that would have fit over top of his existing forearms. This time around, in fact, you actually get fully realized, sculpted, and nicely painted hands. You also get yourself a corresponding collar piece or a cuff piece that's going to replace the existing gauntlets that he has on the ends of his forearms, and those just snap in place like that. The figure also comes included with two variations of his mask. Now, he has already one that I think is my favorite really of the three, but what he does also have included with as well is he has, I'm guessing, Mondo's more modern take of what Skeletor could potentially look like. Instead of now having sockets for eyes where you can't see his eyeball pupils at all, instead they've colored nicely these little ruby stones in the inside sockets. This one also does have an opening and closing mouth, and it sort of does look like if you ever have picked up, for example, or you've even seen advertised online, those Skeletor Premier statues. It kind of gets that feel for me, at least, of like a Skeletor Premier statue. It's a really nicely detailed sculpt. Although if I was to choose one between them, I would actually really default it back to the one that you're currently seeing on the socket of his neck right now. I like this one, though. I just don't find myself ever probably planning to use it. It has a hinge joint, so at least you can open and close the mouth, and this just attaches in place via the ball peg. The figure also as well comes include the Alfredo Alcala Skeletor, which is basically mini comics version of Skeletor. I love the large eyes on this one. Still has tiny little peepers done here in a ruby red, and this one also has an open and closed mouth. All of these, by the way, can be then swapped out. The thing I don't like necessarily about Skeletor is how difficult it is to change the heads. You'll see what I mean in a second. But again, this one does have an open and closed mouth. Really nice portrayal of the Alcala Skeletor from the original mini comics. Then for the figure as well, because again, this is going to be the exclusive release of the figure, he also comes included with a very large cape. Now, the cape is a very good material that they've used. I'll say that right out the gate. The material is not only really thick, but it also has a density to it. Like, it feels like a really heavy cape. It has a wire frame that runs down the side and also runs down the bottom here, so you can manipulate this if you want to have this in a more dynamic pose. The thing about the cape, though, is it's supposed to attach on the back of Skeletor's body. Not an easy feat. To go along with it, though, the figure also comes included with a hood. Now, I will say I'm not a big fan of the hood. This whole time, I know we've kind of looked at the accessories. I haven't really done much of anything to really put these actually on the figure itself. We'll change that more in a second. But he also comes included with a cloth cape. It matches the color nicely to the cape itself, the actual hood, that is. I'm surprised, though, looking at the back of it, they've stitched this back section of the hood. So instead of giving him an actual point that comes out from the back, they've sewn it against the rest of the hood. I'm surprised that they didn't decide to have this as a point. I'm almost even tempted to kind of break the seam here, get a little seam ripper, see if I can actually cut, just shred away a little bit of the threading and see if I can actually get the point to stick out. I'm, again, surprised that they sewed it down the way that they did. Again, this will swap out. If you wanted to use this with the cape, you don't really even have to really necessarily use this with Skeletor's cape. If you rather prefer instead to use the plastic hood, you can also do that as well. So showing you how to change then the armor on Skeletor. In between takes, by the way, I've already taken the liberty of looping through the chain. The chain is now attached onto the side of the dragon, but you can see again, like how much warping had to be required on that link in order to fit that around the collar piece. I think if anything, even though it would have been a little more of an eyesore, just putting this down for a second. Remember, if you've ever had, like, for example, a keychain where there's a little clip piece or a little lever, and when you push it, the opening would open and close. Maybe something could similarly been approached here when it came to the Dragon Blaster Skeletor, because again, like, I just don't think it fits properly without having to warp that little linklet. Now, of course, let's go ahead and change out the armor on Skeletor. The existing armor as it is right now is classic-looking Skeletor in every way. I love the way they've actually detailed this guy. Of course, you got the skull and crossbones on the front, missing the skull on the front, only giving us really the crossbones nicely colored here in brown. You got some really nice additional silver, additional metallic purple added there, and all these tiny little details like skulls varying of sizes, starting small and working their way larger as it goes across the front of his shoulders. On the back, there's some nice detail done. They've added some additional silver on his spinal cord and had added some additional silver all across with these tiny little bones that run the parameter of his armor. The thing about the armor, though, is it has to be detached only by one way. So first of all, you got yourself Skeletor here. Now he's wearing currently, as of right now, he's wearing the plastic hood. This hood can just be detached and can then be swapped out with the fabric hood instead. I'll show you guys what that looks like. Let's just pop the head off right now. I'll tell you one thing also with Skeletor. I'm just putting the figure's body down here for a second. When you go to change out any one of his face pieces, by the way, there's only one way, unfortunately, to do it. You have to take off the hood first. You have to slide out the whatever mask, whatever face you're currently using. And then when you go to put in a new one, you have to slide it back in reverse steps. And then you have to put the entire piece back then onto his ball joint. I wish there was a way. I mean, obviously, there would be a very ugly seam right there where they could have had like magnet pieces in a similar fashion to maybe like the battle armor pieces, where you would just be able to attach them, put the face in, or already have the face obviously on there, and then just sandwich the either sides together. I know, obviously, I mean, there's a seam right there, but the seam I think is only more cast from the molding itself. But if they've done something similar, it just would have meant that there's a lot less than work having to put the face in every single time. Now, if you did want to change out the faces, I did want to show you guys quickly. This one is my favorite, really, of all of them. This is the defaulted head. This is the same head, in fact, that's going to come included with the standard release of Skeletor. So if you don't have the availability to get the exclusive, or you just missed your chance to get it, this is the defaulted head that's going to come along with it. And it still opens and closes. It looks like classic-looking Skeletor. If you did want to change out the faces, though, again, you're just going to use this and going to slide this in the front. Now, unfortunately, again, when you're putting this back onto the figure's body, you kind of have to hold the front of the face and you have to kind of push it down from the top. I would encourage the idea probably of first putting the heads onto the ball joint just to widen up the sockets inside the head. Then it'll be a lot easier when it comes to putting the new head in place, and you're not going to have to worry as much of having Skeletor's head falling off. If you did want to look at it, or did want to see it at least, with the cloth hood, let's just slide out Skeletor's face. Take the cloth hood, and it works basically the exact same way. The thing about the cloth hood, though, is while there's a metal frame running all around the side of it, I mean, it always kind of looks a little floppy. It looks a little bit loose. And again, if you want to put that onto Skeletor's body, I'm putting it completely down, but at least show you guys what it looks like. You have to fix it up by quite a lot because, again, unfortunately, there's just so much additional material that they ended up using. Yeah, you can bring this forward a little bit, but it also lacks, again, that little point that it would have had on the back of it. I mean, this goes nicely then with the cape, but preferring really between the two, I'd rather just go with the plastic hood, flipping around here, get the plastic hood going, and have the cape attached with it instead that way. If you did want to change the armor out, though, it's a case of flipping around the back of the figure. There's a peg, I don't know if you can see right there, just on the inside, and then that loops into this section of the armor. So when you're attaching it back, if you want to put it back to his OG armor, you basically have to take this piece, feed it up as high as you can get it, and then take the peg from that and fit it in place. The first couple of times you do this, you'll notice it still stays pretty tight. After that, though, it starts to get too loose, and then the armor piece just, eventually, it doesn't really stay properly in place. But again, if you wanted to change out the armor, there doesn't seem to be any other easier way than I've seen. If there was a way, for example, to detach it from the front, we wouldn't even be having this discussion. But unfortunately, with only detaching it from the back, it seems the only way to change out Skeletor's armor, honestly, from what at least I can see, is actually having to slide the entire armor piece down the side of his body, or down the front of his body. You have to kind of shimmy it down the sides of his legs. I thought for a second, like maybe there was a way that I could bring one of the arms up and I kind of feed it up that way, but no, doesn't seem to be the case. So again, we're just going to bring this down Skeletor's body. shimmy as far down as we can get it. Once we really get past like the thigh section, you really shouldn't have any problems after that. Now, He-Man had a similar kind of case where with his armor, for example, I think it actually detached on the sides and basically just looped its way out. Skeletor, I feel it could have something similar done to that instead of having to rely on having to slide the armor down. Now, I'm just going to default it back to original Skeletor when it's all said and done, but taking the armor off, I just feel that there must have been an easier way to do it other than having to do it the way that we did. Taking the dragon armor, and we're going to kind of take everything together here. We're going to detach the back. Now, again, I've looped the dragon. I've taken the ringlet. I've looped it onto the side of the collar. I've looped then the chain. Did I loop the chain all the way through? Did I miss it? I didn't miss it. Okay. You're going to loop the chain all the way through the front of his torso. This will involve several steps. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the back section of Skeletor with the Dragon Blast. And then we're going to take ourselves the dragon. And we're going to loop it onto the back here. Some of this may not be in frame right now, so I apologize for that. We're going to then take the front half of the piece, and we're going to clip it in place. Now, I did already say the problem with the magnets is I don't feel like they're nearly strong enough. I mean, once you have this on Skeletor's body, I find like, as you can already see, the weight of the dragon starts to pull these apart. You kind of fit them together, but still, I feel like the weight of the dragon is just adding too much stress. I mean, you can already see the way that it starts to separate the seams from the top of the armor. I see right even there. Like, you can... I find one thing also helps as well if you take the arms of the dragon and kind of make them flush to his body, where he's not pushing against the armor, might kind of help to kind of ensure that that's going to last a little bit longer than what it is. Then you're going to take yourself Skeletor's hands. You're going to just remove Skeletor's hand on one side at least. Just wiggle the hand until finally it frees itself from the post. There we go. And then you're going to take yourself the gauntlet. The gauntlet's already going to come off there. And then we're just going to slide the shackle piece then onto Skeletor's forearm. And then we're going to replace the hand. And just get everything back in proper place. And short of maybe just adding the head, now again you can already see what I'm talking about. Short of just changing out the head, there's basically what you look like with Dragon Blast or Skeletor. Good concept on paper, but unfortunately, again, I just feel like the weight of the dragon. I mean, in a case like this, I would have been open to the idea of sacrificing all the articulation on the dragon, just making him actually a lighter piece, so they would probably have held everything in place properly when it comes to displaying this guy, at least as this Dragon Blaster version. Let's go ahead and at least right now, let's take everything back off. After all of that, let's just slide the hand off, take the shackle piece off, take the front half of the armor, take the back half of the armor, and we're just going to make sure that everything still stays together. Just going to put those pieces to the side. I might just bring this guy back when it comes to actually the final look of the figure. I'm not really sure what look I'm going to decide to go with. Of course, with the battle armor version of Skeletor, you're going to then take the hands. Where did I put the hand? The hand was over here. And, oh, there's the hand right there. We're just going to put the hand back in place. There's a lot less fussing and mussing when it comes to the actual battle armor. You're just going to detach the two halves together. Put the front half on the front, the back half on the back, not drop the actual bat piece in the process. That snaps very securely in place. And then you can, of course, take your bat little piece, and that fits also on the front. Obviously, of all the pieces, of all the armors, the battle armor was the easiest to change. Again, I don't really like the idea that they had to add so much weight on the dragon. I mean, on paper, again, it makes for a nice way of displaying the figure, and I do appreciate that obviously it's a nod then to the comics. But unfortunately, though, it just adds unnecessary weight, and there's no way, I feel at least, those two halves, and with such small magnets working behind the scenes, I don't feel like there's really any way to properly have those two halves staying together. So if you wanted to put the cape then on Skeletor, I've already taken the liberty, by the way, of putting back his OG armor. And it was just, again, a case of sliding it back up the legs. There really honestly needed to be an easier way to do that. But we're just going to detach the top here. We're going to slide this down. Take yourself the cape. Now, with the cape, the way they've designed this is that there is actually a little looplet here on the back, with the idea I'm supposing in mind that if you then take, so just picking up the armor, for example, the inside has that little peg. I think the idea is that you take yourself the elastic that fits around the neck of Skeletor's body, and then this part is the part that's supposed to then clip into this little looplet. I've found it was really difficult to actually get that on there, so what I've done instead is simply just put the armor piece over top of Skeletor, on top of Skeletor's cape like this, and just make sure like everything's properly in place, and then the cape honestly just sits fine the way it is. I mean, it's not obviously going to be detached, it's not going to be attached onto the back of the figure's body, but if you're only really looking at it from the front, no one would be any bit the wiser. The only thing it does, unfortunately, now have is then the elastic piece that you're going to see from the front of the figure's body. That could easily then be rectified. We're going to take then the cloth cape, the cloth hood. and we're going to maybe use, say, the more modern looking Skeletor. And again, we're just going to take that. That's going to fit on top of the frame, or fit on top of the ball joint. Push it down as far down as you can get it. I don't have it completely on there, but that's basically what Skeletor then would look like with the cloth hood. I think I like the cape. I don't know, I would say if I'm as crazy when it comes to the actual hood piece. I think, again, like the hood sits, because you're actually using a real hood material, it's sort of the same argument can be made when it comes to real rooted hair on figures. You really have to do it well enough that it doesn't look bulky, it doesn't look too unrealistic. I think with the hood, while some people may prefer to have the fabric hood because it's going to go then with the fabric cape, I'm not really a big fan of it myself because I just feel it loses some of its form. Rather, instead, I'd like to just probably use like the plastic hood, just because, again, you've got a fully sculpted, and it's always going to stay the way it's designed, so I'm never going to have to worry about this flopping around on me, and I could just have the figure displayed that way instead. Jumping now over to the accessories that come included with a standard release of Skeletor, there's still quite a lot of territory to cover. First, the figure comes included with this power sword. The power sword looks to be a casting of the same one that we got included with He-Man. This, though, done in metallic purple instead. They don't give you the option of having the two halves that can come together to, of course, make the power sword, but I like the more fully sculpted on both sides version of this instead. Some additional silver has also been added there as well. The coloring of the handle looks nicely done here in a matte black finish. The figure also comes included with his scepter battle axe. I'm sure he uses it as a scepter, because judging by the fact it's got a big orb on the end of it, but it also is a really nice looking battle axe as well. It matches somewhat the same similar purple that they've used for the blade for the power sword. Nicely done here, and again, really good. I always like to kind of display my figures, at least of the smaller size. With the battle armor, I usually always like to put the figures with their battle axes, and it's just something I like to do. The figure also comes included with his Havoc staff. The strange thing about the Havoc staff is not only is it nicely painted, but for a second looking at it, it looks like there's a hinge on the back of the jaw. I thought there'd be a way to move this where I would open and close it, because if you look at the back, it almost looks as if it's attached via ball joints. I didn't want to force the matter because, again, I just didn't want to break anything on a possibility of thinking that something could move on it. Other than that, though, it's a really nice looking version of the Havoc staff. And it's quite long as well, too. If you're putting it next to Skeletor, it goes almost to the top of the figure's head. The figure also comes included with a series of interchangeable hands. Now, he has, as of right now, closed-fisted hands inside the sockets of his forearms. If you prefer to have him wielding something instead, though, the figure has a couple of gripping hands. The figure also comes included with slight relaxed versions of gripping hands, a little bit more of a wider grip, essentially. The figure also comes included with a couple of gestured hands. Now, this looks like almost tea time Skeletor by the way he's got a little tiny pinky straight out like this. It looks a little out of place. I prefer like the hands just if they had only simply taken this hand and mirror flipped it over to this one. I think I would have preferred that a little bit more instead. But yeah, if you wanted to have power crazed Skeletor displayed on your shelf, definitely give him one of these hands. I think that's going to fit the bill nicely. And then, of course, the figure finally comes included with this classic-looking head sculpt. If you wanted to throw back to the original Master Universe figures from back in the 80s and you wanted classic-looking Skeletor, this will, again, just pop off the existing head that he already has right now. And instead of actually taking the hood piece and having to slide then the face in the front of it, this is all one piece. Self-contained. Nicely painted also as well. With that all now being said, we've covered off, like I said, quite a lot of territory. Let's now look at Skeletor here. Now, I know we've looked at mostly Skeletor, but this is basically, again, going back to the way he would have looked if you got yourself the standard release of him. Sporting what I feel to be the superior of all the head sculpts. This one here has, again, like the mouth that opens and closes. This one also has already had more time also onto the ball peg, so it means that this one attaches a little bit more securely than, say, the other three head sculpts we've already had a look at. It still has the hood piece that's separate, so that's one of the unfortunate things that always have to have happen with Skeletor because he has to have a hood. The hood never really attaches properly and never looks like its seamless look to the rest of his shoulder armor. It sits a little loose, but of course it's something that if you have it close enough always to his armor, I mean, it looks, again, pretty seamless until you start to move the figure's head around. The top of the body, of course, now this is all utilizing a brand new mold and some additional articulation that wasn't on the original Skeletor from before. Again, we've already looked at the fact that the top armor piece is really nicely decorative detailed. Of course, the actual lower half of his body, he has these little skirt flaps that go over top of an essentially like a furry loincloth. And the loincloth covers, of course, all the features underneath. I suppose you would be able to probably take off all of this if you wanted to have a classic-looking Skeletor. But all the armor and all the adorning detail that they've actually sculpted on there. I love this little front face that they've got on the front of his belt. And of course, this does loop around to the back. It does look like it almost looks like you'd be able to attach this. But again, I think that the same thing will end up happening. If you start to loosen this too much, similar to what you would have done on the back of his armor piece, this would start to have a harder time staying together. All nicely detailed, though. Again, you got these tiny little skulls all across each of the individual skirtings, and he does, of course, have the Skeletor boots down below with the leg guards, which have some nice additional gold added in there as well. Looks a little bit like a throwback to Hordak and the Horde, but nice gold there nonetheless. For the figure's articulation, this Skeletor does have pretty much the same retained articulation as He-Man from before. The head is going to be on a ball joint, so it does move independently back and forth. It does move up and down, but again, when you're moving it up and down, what will usually end up happening is it's going to leave a section in between the hood and the rest, of course, of his shoulder piece. Now, again, you can also bring the hood a little bit further forward if you want to have that really low-looking Skeletor. I love the look of that. Arms do come out. Now, I noticed with my arms, at least, these arms are really on the more tighter side. The arms normally would be able to come out 90 degrees. You can also take those arms and move them forward and back. The figure has a swivel at not his bicep necessarily. The bicep is actually a separate joint right there, but he also has technically two hinges. So he's got one swivel here, and then dividing the two, he also has a hinge joint that allows the form to bend back and forth. The hands as well rotate also all the way around. The upper torso of Skeletor has an upper torso ball joint. Further down from that on his abdomen area, he has also an abdomen joint, so you can move that also all the way around. Legs do split out on Skeletor. You can take those legs and move them forward and back. The problem with moving the legs forward and back, though, is it's really tight quarters here. You're really not going to be able to move the legs very freely forward and back. There's a mild swivel at the top of the thigh, double hinge on the knee, which is really tight on my figure. And then he also has the ankle articulation where you can move it back and forth this way and back and forth this way as well. Clearly the definitive version of Skeletor. This is the Skeletor I've always really wanted. Now, we did also get another version of Skeletor. I used to have had that figure in my collection. I don't have that figure anymore in my collection, and that's one of the reasons why I never brought him in for comparisons. But we did get that original OG Skeletor that sort of did have that same similar mini comic head sculpt that we got from Alfredo Alcala. Now, speaking of that head sculpt, I'm glad to see that they actually include that, a nice little nod to the original mini comics. There's a lot, again, going on here with Skeletor. There's a lot of extra pieces off to the side here that you probably can already see for yourself. I like all the things that they included with the figure. The only thing I'm not as big of a fan, though, is the Dragon Blaster sculpt. All the additional armor pieces that they incorporated for the Dragon Blaster. While it sounds, again, good on paper, my problem, again, with it, though, is I feel like the magnets just aren't nearly strong enough. We're going to bring those pieces back in right now. With so much weight being occupied by the dragon that sits on the back of his body, I feel like, again, like those poor little magnets don't stand a chance to try to stay together. They should have probably devised a better way, I feel, to securely attach the back half to the front half of his armor so it would stayed properly in place. As it is right now, I think the dragon is way too heavy on the back of Skeletor's body, that if you did want to have the figure displayed, for example, in his Dragon Blaster setup, I think you may want to have something additionally added. I almost even considered the idea of taking like clear elastics and wrapping around the figure's body. For me, at least, though, I'm probably going to either be displaying him as you're currently seeing right now, or I might also default him over to the Battle Armor Skeletor. The beauty of what they're doing here from Mondo is the fact that they give you so many different options, different variations of having Skeletor, that every once in a while, I'm doing even now with my He-Man. I go back to He-Man from time to time. I change out his armor. So he's not always just classic-looking He-Man. From time to time, he also becomes Battle Armor He-Man. I might do something very similar here as well for Skeletor. I really did have high hopes to have the figure displayed in final looks with the Dragon Blaster, because again, from an accessory standpoint, it has the highest count. Unfortunately, though, just with the armor way it's designed and how heavy, I know I keep talking about the dragon, it just doesn't work, especially when I'm rotating the figure on a turntable. I had the armor actually coming off a couple of times. Go with more the lighter look instead. I've got the figure displayed here with the Battle Armor. Love the look of Battle Armor Skeletor. Even as a kid, I grew up loving the look of the Battle Armor. I still wish I could kind of track down one of the original Battle Armor Skeletors, as I'd like to have one on my display shelf. But I like the look of this figure. I've got the figure, as you can currently see, displayed with his battle axe sort of scepter weapon that he wields. A nice way of displaying the figure. There's so many different choices always that Mondo affords with these figures. If you get the chance, like I said, to get the timed edition, I know the timed edition sold out pretty fast at $260, but given the fact it gave us 2 different additional armor pieces, 2 additional head pieces, and also as well the Terror Claws version of Skeletor, which I didn't end up showing you guys in this review. It's simply just a case of popping off the hands on the ends of forearms and swapping them out accordingly. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways of having the figure displayed. For me, I'm going to probably go to either the OG look, either without or with the cape, or have the figure displayed with the battle armor. I'm kind of, again, warming a little more to the idea of displaying the figure with the battle armor. I really like the look of that. But what do you guys think of Skeletor? Let me know down below in the comment section. Have you guys had the chance to pick up this version? And if you have, have? Have you picked up either the exclusive edition or were you lucky enough to get the exclusive timed edition? Big thank you once again to the folks over at Mondo that did provide this sample of the brand new Master Universe Skeletor. This was the exclusive timed edition. We had the chance to have a look at this review. If you guys did enjoy this video, want to hit with a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing, and you certainly do want to stick around for more, if you haven't already done so, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below and you're turning on the bell notification. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.